Hana sat in the back corner of the Advanced Combat Theory classroom and watched the other cadets argue about battle plans. The Krillian students were loud as always, their thick armored skin making scraping sounds when they moved in their seats. The Vortec cadets clicked their sharp claws on their desks while they talked about hunting strategies their people used on distant worlds. Everyone had something to say except Hana. She kept her notebook open and wrote down everything, the instructors said. Her pen moved across the paper in small, neat letters, while the alien students debated whether flanking attacks worked better than direct assault. Cadet Zixthera stood up from her seat near the front and pointed at the tactical display with one of her 4 arms. She was the daughter of some important Krillian leader and never let anyone forget it. "My father's warriors would charge straight through the center," Zixthera said in her deep voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. "Krillian strength breaks any defense." The Vorthak students made their hissing laugh sound. Cadet Mordak leaned back in his chair and showed his pointed teeth. "Vorthak speed would cut down your slow warriors before they took 10 steps. We strike fast and vanish like shadows." Hana wrote down both strategies in her notebook. She also wrote down 3 reasons why each plan would fail against a prepared enemy. She did not share these thoughts with the class. Instructor Kang Do-yun stood at the front of the room and watched the debate continue. He was one of the few human teachers at the Galactic Military Academy, and his hair had gone gray from years of training young warriors from across the galaxy. His eyes moved around the room and stopped on Hana more often than the other students. When she noticed him looking, she focused harder on her notebook. The classroom door opened and Combat Master Thexlar walked in. The massive Krillian warrior had to duck his head to fit through the doorway. His natural armor was scarred from real battles and his 4 eyes glowed with a dim red light. All the students went quiet when they saw him. "Continue your discussion," Thexlar said, but his voice made it sound more like an order than a suggestion. His lower pair of eyes swept across the room while his upper eyes focused on the tactical display. When his gaze passed over Hana's corner, he paused for just a moment longer than necessary. The debate started again, but less loudly than before. Hana noticed that Combat Master Thexlar kept one eye pointed toward her section of the room, even while he talked with Instructor Kang. She could not hear their whispered conversation, but she saw how they both looked in her direction. After class ended, the other human cadets gathered around Hana's desk. Park Minho was tall for a human and always tried to be friendly with everyone. Kim Jisoo was small and quick, and reminded Hana of her younger sister back on Earth. Yoon Taik was quiet like Hana, but in a different way, more shy than careful. "And we are studying together tonight for the tactics exam," Minho said with a hopeful smile. "You should join us. We could use your help with the formation analysis." Hana closed her notebook and gathered her materials. "Thank you, but I prefer to study alone." "Come on, Hana," Jisoo said while bouncing slightly on her feet. "It will be fun. We can order food from that place that makes Earth noodles." "I appreciate the offer," Hana replied in her soft voice. "But I have other plans." The 3 humans exchanged looks. They had invited Hana to study groups, meal times, and recreation activities for months. She always said no politely but firmly. Tyke shrugged and picked up his bag. "Maybe next time," he said, though they all knew there would not be a next time. Hana walked through the corridors of the Academy station toward the observation deck. Other students moved aside when they saw her coming. Not in the obvious way they moved for larger alien students or important cadets like Zixthera. This was different, more subtle. They stepped aside almost without thinking about it and then looked confused about why they had moved. The observation deck was usually crowded, but it emptied out when Hana arrived. She did not chase anyone away or ask for privacy. Students just seemed to decide they had somewhere else to be. Within minutes, she was alone with the stars. Hana sat on a bench near the large viewing window and opened her notebook again. She reviewed the day's lessons while ships moved past the station like distant lights. Supply vessels brought food and equipment. Patrol ships headed out to check the system borders. Everything moved in patterns that made sense if you paid attention to the details. Footsteps echoed behind her. Tactical Instructor Vexhan approached with her usual silent, gliding walk. The Vorthak teacher was smaller than the male students of her species, but her movements were even faster and more precise. Her large eyes could track multiple targets at once, and her hearing could pick up sounds across several rooms. "Cadet Lee," Vexhan said while staying several steps away from the bench, "you missed the Advanced Starship Maneuvering Seminar this afternoon." "I was not scheduled for that seminar," Hana replied without looking away from her notebook. "No," Vexhan agreed. "But students of your academic level usually attend anyway." Hana finally looked up. The Vorthak instructor was standing farther away than necessary for a normal conversation. Her hands were held carefully away from her sides in a posture that looked casual, but was actually a defensive stance. "Is there something specific you wanted to discuss about my studies?" Hana asked. Vexhan tilted her head in the way her species did when they were thinking. "Your test scores are excellent, your tactical analyses are thorough. Your simulation performance is adequate." "Thank you," Hana said and started to return to her notebook. "But you never volunteer answers in class," Vexhan continued. "You decline all social activities. You spend your free time alone." "I prefer quiet study environments," Hana explained. "The galaxy's military forces require officers who can work with diverse teams," Vexhan said. "Leadership demands social skills and group cooperation." Hana closed her notebook and stood up from the bench. As she moved, Instructor Vexhan took a small step backward without seeming to realize it. "I understand the importance of teamwork," Hana said in her calm, quiet voice. "When the time comes, I will work with others as needed." Something in her tone made Vexhan's large eyes widen slightly. The instructor's head tilted further, and her nostrils flared as if she was trying to catch a scent. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something else. Instead, she nodded once and stepped aside. "Of course, Cadet Lee. Carry on." Hana walked past the instructor and toward the dormitory levels. Behind her, Vexhan remained on the observation deck for several minutes, staring out at the stars and occasionally glancing at the spot where Hana had been sitting. The next morning brought another day of classes and training exercises. Hana took her usual seat in the back corner and prepared her notebook while the other students filed in. She noticed that Combat Master Thexelar was present again, standing near the instructor's desk with his arms folded across his massive chest. Today's lesson focused on fleet formations and coordinated attacks. The alien students were eager to share stories of famous battles from their species' military history. They drew diagrams on the display screen and argued about the best ways to position different types of warships. Hana wrote everything down. She also sketched small diagrams in the margins of her notebook, showing how each formation could be defeated with proper timing and positioning. Her pen moved quickly across the paper while she calculated angles of approach and estimated response times. "Cadet Zixthara," Instructor Kang called out. "Please demonstrate the Krillian hammer formation." The large alien student stood up eagerly and walked to the front of the class. She began moving ship icons on the tactical display, while explaining how her people used overwhelming force to break enemy lines. It was an impressive formation that had won many battles. While Zixthara talked, Hana noticed that Combat Master Thexelar was watching her again. All four of his eyes were focused on her corner of the room. She pretended not to notice and continued taking notes. "And this formation has never been defeated," Zixthara finished with pride in her voice. Several students nodded approvingly. The Vorthak cadets looked less impressed, but they did not disagree out loud. Hana raised her hand for the first time in weeks. The classroom went completely silent. Instructor Kang looked surprised. Combat Master Thexelar straightened up and focused, all his attention on Hana. "Yes, Cadet Lee," Kang said. Hana stood up slowly and every eye in the room followed her movement. "I have a question about the formation supply lines," she said in her quiet voice that somehow carried clearly to every corner of the room. The silence stretched longer. Then Combat Master Thexelar spoke. "Class dismissed," he said suddenly. "Report to your next assignments." The students looked confused but began gathering their materials. Zixthara appeared frustrated that her presentation had been cut short. As the cadets filed out of the room, both instructors remained behind. With Hana, When the door closed, the three of them were alone. The joint training exercise began before dawn on the Academy's combat simulation deck. Cadets from different species were paired together to navigate through a mock battlefield filled with sensor traps, automated defenses, and shifting terrain, obstacles. The exercise was designed to test how well different species could work together under pressure. Hana found herself assigned to work with Cadet Mordak, a young Vorthak warrior with silver-striped skin and the typical sharp reflexes of his people. He stood nearly 7 feet tall and moved with the fluid grace that made his species such effective hunters. Most human cadets found working with Vorthak partners challenging because of their speed and aggressive instincts. "Stay close and try not to slow me down," Mordak said as they approached their starting position. His voice carried the slight hiss that all Vorthak had when speaking the common galactic language. Hana adjusted her equipment harness and checked her scanner readings. "I will do my best to keep up," she replied calmly. The simulation began with a loud signal tone. Around them, the training deck transformed into a rocky canyon landscape with scattered cover points and hidden dangers. Other cadet teams spread out across the terrain, each following their own route toward the objective points they needed to reach. Mordak immediately sprinted forward with his natural speed, but after 20 steps, he realized his human partner was not behind him. He looked back and saw Hana standing at the starting position, studying her scanner display with intense concentration. "What are you doing?" he called out. "We need to move fast before the other teams take all the good positions." "There is a pattern in the sensor readings," Hana said without looking up from her device. "The trap placement follows a mathematical sequence." Mordak ran back to where she stood. "Traps are supposed to be random. That is the point of the exercise." "Nothing is truly random," Hana replied. "Even computer-generated random numbers follow patterns if you know how to look for them." She walked forward slowly, checking her scanner every few steps. Mordak followed behind her, his instincts telling him to rush ahead, but something about her certainty making him hesitate. They moved through the canyon at what seemed like a painfully slow pace compared to other teams racing past them. "Turn left here," Hana said when they reached a junction between two paths. "The objective is to the right," Mordak protested. "My tactical display clearly shows the shortest route." "The shortest route has 17 sensor traps and 3 automated turret positions," Hana said while continuing to walk left. "This path has 2 minor obstacles and leads to a better approach angle." Mordak's training told him to trust his own instincts and speed rather than follow a slow human female, but something made him stay with her. Maybe it was the complete confidence in her voice or the way she moved through the terrain like she could see things his advanced Vorthak senses could not detect. They walked for another 10 minutes through winding passages and across open ground. Hana would occasionally stop to check her readings and then change direction slightly. She never seemed hurried or uncertain about where to go. Mordak found himself watching how she analyzed each new area they entered. "How do you know where the enemies will be?" he asked after she led them around a hill that looked empty but turned out to have a hidden sniper position on the other side. "I do not know where they are," Hana replied. "I know where they should be based on optimal defensive positions and resource allocation patterns." "That makes no sense." "Everything makes sense if you have enough information and time to process it properly." They reached their first objective point 15 minutes ahead of schedule without triggering a single trap or encountering any automated defenses. Mordak realized they had somehow taken a route that avoided every danger while still being more efficient than the direct paths other teams were attempting. "Lucky guessing," he muttered, but he did not sound convinced. The second objective required them to cross a wide valley filled with moving patrol drones and shifting barrier walls. Other cadet teams were already engaged in firefights with the automated defenders or struggling to find ways through the obstacles. Hana sat down on a rock and watched the chaos below them for several minutes. "What now?" Mordak asked. "Do we charge down there and fight our way through like everyone else?" "No," Hana said while making notes in a small notebook she carried. "We wait for the patrol pattern to complete 2 full cycles, then we follow the supply drone when it makes its maintenance run." "What supply drone?" "The one that will appear in approximately 4 minutes to service the barrier generators. It follows a safe corridor that avoids all the defensive systems." Mordak used his enhanced vision to scan the valley floor. He could see the other cadet teams struggling with various obstacles and enemies, but no supply drone was visible anywhere. "I do not see any supply drone," he said. "Because it has not arrived yet," Hana replied patiently. "But the barrier walls require power to maintain their position changes. That power comes from generators that need regular maintenance. The maintenance schedule follows standard military logistics protocols." 4 minutes and 20 seconds later, a small automated supply drone emerged from a concealed service hatch and began flying across the valley toward the barrier generators. Hana stood up and started walking down the hill along a path that paralleled the drone's route. They reached the second objective point without being detected by any of the valley's defenses. Mordek watched other teams still fighting their way through the obstacles they had easily bypassed. "This is impossible," he said. "No one can predict automated systems that precisely." "I am not predicting," Hana replied while marking their success in her notebook. "I am observing patterns that already exist." The third and final objective was located inside a fortified compound with multiple layers of security. Teams that had made it this far were now facing the most difficult challenge of the exercise. Heavy weapon emplacements covered all approaches and mobile defender units patrolled the perimeter. Hana walked to the edge of the compound's outer security zone and sat down again to observe. Other teams were attempting direct assaults, stealth, infiltrations, and coordinated flanking maneuvers. Most were being eliminated by the defender systems within minutes of starting their approaches. "The defenses are too strong," Mordak said after watching several teams fail. "Maybe we should try a speed approach. I can run faster than their tracking systems can follow." "Speed will not work," Hana replied while studying the compound through her scanner. "The mobile defenders are programmed to intercept fast-moving targets. They have prediction algorithms that calculate interception courses." "Then what do you suggest?" Hana pointed to a maintenance access tunnel that other teams had ignored because it appeared to lead away from the objective. "We go through the waste disposal system." "That is disgusting," Mordak said with obvious distaste. "It is also undefended because no military planner expects enemies to use sewage tunnels for infiltration." They crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnel for 20 minutes. The tunnel was not actually filled with waste since this was a simulation, but it was uncomfortable and undignified. Mordak began to understand why other teams had avoided this route. The tunnel emerged inside the compound's central courtyard, directly behind the main objective target. They completed their mission without triggering any alarms or encountering any resistance. When the exercise ended, their team had achieved the highest score in Academy history. They had reached all 3 objectives faster than any other team, while avoiding every trap and defensive system in the simulation. Back in the debriefing room, other cadets stared at Hana and Mordak with confusion and suspicion. The exercise instructors reviewed the recorded data multiple times, checking for equipment malfunctions or cheating. "How did you know about the maintenance schedules?" asked Instructor Vexhan. "Standard military logistics follow predictable patterns," Hana replied in her quiet voice. "Equipment requires regular maintenance. Supply lines need constant resupply. Security systems have built-in vulnerabilities to allow authorized access." "But those patterns are classified information," protested Combat Master Thexler. "Cadets are not given access to base operational details." "I did not access any classified information," Hana said calmly. "I observed the available data and made logical conclusions based on standard operational procedures." After the debriefing, Mordak walked back to the dormitories with a troubled expression. His older brother, Captain Velkar, was visiting the academy that day, and Mordak found him in the officers' mess reviewing reports on his portable display. "Brother," Mordak said while sitting down across from the older Vorthak warrior, "I need to ask you about something strange that happened today." Velkar looked up from his reports. He had the scarred appearance of a veteran soldier who had seen real combat in the outer systems. His silver stripes were darker than his younger brother's, and his eyes held the alertness of someone who had survived dangerous situations. "What troubles you?" Velkar asked. Mordak described the training exercise and how the human cadet had somehow known things that should have been impossible to predict. He explained how she had navigated through complex defensive systems like she understood, their programming better than their creators. What was her name? Velkar asked when his brother finished talking. Lee Hana. Moradak. The midterm examination was the most challenging test the Galactic Military Academy offered to its cadets. Every student would participate in a massive battle simulation that had been designed by the greatest military minds from across the known galaxy. The scenario was deliberately impossible to win completely, meant to test how future officers would perform when facing overwhelming odds and certain defeat. The simulation recreated the siege of Korthax Prime, a famous battle where outnumbered defenders had held a strategic position for 3 months against superior enemy forces. The original battle had ended in heroic failure, with the defenders fighting to the last soldier. Academy cadets were expected to do better than history, but no one had ever achieved more than a partial success. Cadet Commander Zix Thara stood in the primary command center reviewing tactical displays with the confidence of someone born to lead warriors. Her natural Krillian armor gleamed under the artificial lights and her 4 arms moved efficiently between different control interfaces. She had been chosen to lead the operation based on her outstanding combat scores and noble bloodline. Primary assault teams will advance along the main approach routes, she announced to the assembled cadets. We will use overwhelming force to break through their defensive positions before they can organize effective resistance. Around the command center, cadets from different species prepared for their assigned roles. Park Minho coordinated intelligence, gathering operations with his usual careful attention to detail. Kim Jisoo managed communication networks between the various teams. Yoon Taik supervised weapon system operations from his technical station. Lee Hana sat at a small desk in the corner marked Logistics Support. Her assignment was to monitor supply levels and ensure that combat units received ammunition, medical supplies, and equipment replacements when needed. It was considered one of the least important positions in the entire operation. The simulation began with enemy forces already entrenched in strong defensive positions across a mountain valley. Automated gun emplacements covered every approach route. Minefields blocked vehicle access. Long-range artillery could strike anywhere in the surrounding area. The defenders had every advantage except numbers. Zixthera launched her primary assault, with the Academy's most skilled combat cadets. Krillian students charged forward with their natural armor, providing protection against light weapons. Vorthak cadets used their speed and agility to infiltrate enemy positions. Cadets from other warrior species contributed their own specialized abilities to the coordinated attack. For the first hour, the assault made good progress. Several outer defensive positions fell to the combined alien forces. Communication intercepts suggested the enemy was being pushed back toward their main fortification. Cadet morale remained high despite mounting casualties. Then the simulation's adaptive AI began to respond. The artificial intelligence controlling enemy forces had been programmed to learn from cadet tactics and develop counter-strategies in real time. As the assault continued, the AI started predicting cadet movements and preparing more effective defenses. Artillery strikes began landing with deadly accuracy on advancing troops. Ambush positions appeared in areas that had been cleared minutes earlier. Supply convoys carrying critical ammunition were destroyed by precisely timed raids. The enemy AI was adapting faster than the cadets could adjust their strategies. By the 3rd hour, the assault had stalled completely. Casualty reports showed that more than half the attacking forces had been eliminated. The remaining cadets were trapped in exposed positions under constant enemy fire. Morale was collapsing as unit after unit reported failures and retreats. We need to pull back and regroup, Park Minho reported from his intelligence station. The enemy is anticipating every move we make. Krillian warriors do not retreat, Zixthera declared, but her voice carried less confidence than before. We advance until we achieve victory or die in the attempt. Noble death serves no strategic purpose, replied Cadet Vorhan from the Selenite contingent. We should withdraw and develop new approaches. The debate continued while the situation deteriorated further. Enemy forces were now conducting aggressive counterattacks against isolated cadet positions. What had started as a coordinated assault was becoming a series of desperate last stands. In her corner of the command center, Hana quietly reviewed supply distribution reports and logistics data. She noticed patterns in how resources were being allocated and where supply lines were experiencing delays. Her fingers moved across her computer interface, making small adjustments to delivery schedules and route assignments. Cadet Lee called out Zix during a brief pause in the tactical arguments. "Can your logistics teams provide more ammunition to the forward assault units?" "The supply routes to forward positions are currently compromised," Hana replied without looking up from her displays. "However, I could adjust distribution patterns to improve efficiency." "Do whatever is necessary," Zix ordered before. Returning to her tactical discussions, Hana began making subtle changes to the simulation's supply network. She rerouted ammunition shipments through secondary paths that avoided known enemy ambush sites. She adjusted patrol schedules so that supply convoys would travel during periods when enemy surveillance was focused elsewhere. She modified communication protocols to reduce the chances of intercepted messages revealing supply movements. The changes were small and seemed insignificant compared to the massive battle raging across the simulated battlefield. Most of the other cadets did not notice what Hana was doing. They were too focused on the immediate crisis of combat operations to pay attention to background logistics. But the AI noticed. The artificial intelligence had been programmed to monitor all aspects of the battlefield, including supply lines and resource allocation. As Hana made her adjustments, the AI began detecting irregularities and patterns it had learned to exploit. Supply convoys that should have been vulnerable were arriving safely at their destinations. Communication intercepts that had provided valuable intelligence were no longer available. Ammunition stockpiles that the AI had planned to target were being moved before attacks could be launched. The AI attempted to adapt to these changes by developing new strategies, but each time it adjusted its approach, the human cadet made corresponding modifications to her logistics patterns. The artificial intelligence found itself caught in an increasingly complex web of tactical adjustments that seemed to anticipate its responses. After 5 hours of simulation time, something unprecedented occurred. The enemy AI began making critical, tactical errors. Artillery strikes that should have devastated cadet positions landed in empty areas. Counterattacks were launched at positions that had been quietly abandoned. Supply raids targeted convoys that were no longer following their predicted routes. The tide of battle shifted dramatically. Cadet forces that had been on the verge of total defeat suddenly found themselves facing confused and disorganized enemy resistance. Positions that had been impossible to assault became vulnerable to coordinated attacks. Supply lines that had been constantly threatened achieved reliable security. Zix stared at her tactical displays in amazement as her forces began advancing successfully against positions that had been impregnable hours earlier. "What is happening?" she demanded. "Why are the enemy forces making such obvious mistakes? Their command structure appears to be experiencing coordination failures," reported Park Minho from his intelligence station. "Intercepted communications suggest internal confusion about tactical priorities. This is not normal behavior for the simulation AI," added Kim Jisoo from her communication post. "The system has never shown this kind of systematic dysfunction before." In her corner, Hana continued making small adjustments to supply schedules and resource allocation patterns. Her modifications had grown increasingly subtle and complex as the simulation progressed. She was no longer just moving supplies efficiently. She was creating cascading effects throughout the entire battlefield logistics network. The AI controlling enemy forces had been designed to learn and adapt, but it had never encountered an opponent who could manipulate its learning process. Every time the artificial intelligence tried to develop new strategies based on observed patterns, those patterns would shift in ways that invalidated its conclusions. The enemy AI began second-guessing its own tactical decisions. It would prepare for one type of attack, then receive data suggesting a different approach was more likely. It would allocate resources to defend against predicted threats, only to discover those threats never materialized, while unexpected attacks succeeded elsewhere. By the 6th hour, the artificial intelligence was caught in a cascade failure of conflicting tactical assessments. Its decision-making processes had become so tangled in false patterns and misleading data that it could no longer function effectively. The simulation ended with complete cadet victory. For the first time in 40 years of Academy history, students had not only survived the impossible scenario, but had achieved total success with minimal casualties. The siege of Corthax Prime had been won decisively by forces that should have been overwhelmed. The command center fell silent as cadets stared at their success. Captain Velkar returned to the Academy 3 days after the midterm simulation results were classified. This time, he brought an escort of senior officers from multiple species, including a Krillian battlemaster, a Selenite fleet commander, and a Vorthak intelligence specialist. They arrived without fanfare and requested a private meeting with the Academy's senior staff. The visiting officers were scheduled to give a routine lecture on military history to the Advanced Tactical Studies class. When the cadets assembled in the main auditorium, they expected another boring presentation about famous battles and strategic principles. Instead, they found themselves facing some of the most decorated combat veterans in the known galaxy. Hana took her usual seat in the back corner, while other students filled the front rows eagerly. Cadet Zixthara sat prominently in the center section, where she could ask impressive questions. Park Minho, Kim Jisoo, and Yoon Taek found seats together near the middle of the auditorium. Mordak sat farther back than usual, following his brothers. Advice to avoid the quiet human cadet. Captain Velkar stepped forward to address the assembled students. His scarred features and battle-worn appearance commanded immediate attention from every cadet in the room. Behind him, the other veteran officers stood in formal military posture, their various alien forms creating an impressive display of galactic unity. Today we will discuss the Hegemony Wars, Velkar announced in his deep Vorthak voice that carried clearly through the large auditorium. This conflict occurred 23 years ago and nearly destroyed civilization across 17 star systems. The cadets settled into their seats expectantly. The Hegemony Wars were mentioned in their history courses, but most details remained classified. Learning about real combat from veterans who had participated would be educational and exciting. The war began when the Hegemony Alliance launched coordinated attacks against the primary worlds of 4 major species, Velkar continued. Their forces were well-equipped, strategically positioned, and commanded by experienced military leaders. Within 6 months, they had achieved victories that should have taken years to accomplish. Images appeared on the auditorium's main display showing battle damage on various planets. Destroyed cities, burned forests, and refugee camps filled with displaced civilians. The scope of destruction was far greater than anything mentioned in standard history courses. The Galactic Defense Coalition was formed to resist the hegemony threat, Velkar explained while the images cycled through scenes of military mobilization. Krillian ground forces, Vorthak rapid strike units, Selenite fleet operations, and warriors from dozens of other species combined their efforts in a unified response. Cadet Zixthara raised one of her 4 arms. Captain, my family histories mention that Krillian forces achieved several significant victories during this period. Individual battles were won, Velkar acknowledged, but the overall war was being lost. The hegemony's coordinated strategy was defeating our separate tactical approaches. Their supply lines were secure, their intelligence networks were superior, and their resource allocation was more efficient than anything we could achieve. The veteran captain paused and looked around the auditorium. His gaze lingered for a moment on Hana's corner before returning to the general audience. After 18 months of increasing defeats, the coalition leadership was facing the possibility of complete collapse. He continued. Our military forces were exhausted, our resources were depleted, and our alliance was fragmenting under the pressure of constant losses. What changed the situation? Asked Cadet Park Minho. Humanity offered to help, Velkar replied simply. Several students made dismissive sounds. Humans were known to be physically weak compared to most galactic species. Their reflexes were slower than Vorthak, their strength was less than Krillian, and their senses were inferior to Selenite capabilities. The idea that humans could contribute meaningfully to a war between apex predator species seemed absurd. The coalition leadership had similar doubts, Velkar said, apparently reading their thoughts. Human military forces were small and equipped with outdated technology. Their combat experience was limited to minor conflicts within their own star system. Then why did the coalition accept their offer? Asked Kim Jisoo. Because we were desperate, admitted Krillian Battlemaster Thexmore from his position behind Velkar. Every conventional strategy had failed. We were willing to try anything that might change our situation. The display showed images of human officers arriving at coalition headquarters. They appeared unremarkable compared to the alien military leaders around them. Average height, standard equipment, normal uniforms. Nothing about their appearance suggested special capabilities. The human delegation was led by Admiral Lee Jong-soo, Velkar continued. He reviewed our tactical situation for 3 days, then made a proposal that shocked the entire coalition command structure. What did he propose? Zixthara asked. He promised to end the war within 6 months, Velkar replied. Complete victory over hegemony forces with minimal additional casualties. The auditorium filled with murmurs of disbelief. Even with the advantages of hindsight, such a promise seemed impossible. The hegemony alliance had been winning decisively for over a year against the combined forces of the galaxy's greatest warriors. The coalition leadership was skeptical, Velkar admitted. But Admiral Lee made his promise with such complete confidence that we agreed to let him try his approach. What was his strategy? Asked Yoon Taek. That is what confused us, Velkar replied. He did not request additional ships, weapons, or troops. Instead, he asked for access to our logistics systems, communication networks, and supply chain management databases. The display showed charts and graphs filled with numbers, shipping schedules, and resource allocation tables. They looked more like commercial business reports than military strategic planning. The humans sent small teams of analysts, logistics coordinators, and communication specialists to work with our existing forces, Velkar explained. They carried notebooks instead of weapons. They asked questions about supply schedules, maintenance routines, and administrative procedures. How could that possibly help win a war? Demanded Cadet Mordak from his seat. We asked the same question, Velkar replied. Admiral Lee's answer was simple. He said that wars are not won by the side with the strongest warriors, but by the side with the most efficient systems. The veteran captain walked closer to the student seating area while he continued his presentation. For 4 months, these human specialists worked quietly in the background of our military operations. They made small suggestions about communication protocols, minor adjustments to supply schedules, and tiny modifications to maintenance procedures. And this actually helped? Asked a Selenite cadet from the front row. At first, we saw no difference, Velkar admitted. Battles continued to be fought and lost in the same patterns as before. The hegemony maintained their strategic advantages, and our situation continued to deteriorate. The display showed more images of defeated coalition forces and advancing hegemony troops. The war appeared to be proceeding exactly as before, with no sign that human involvement was making any difference. Then, in the 5th month, something remarkable occurred, Velkar said. Hegemony supply lines began experiencing unexpected delays. Their communication systems started showing coordination problems. Equipment failures increased across their entire military structure. Sabotage operations, suggested Zixthara. No sabotage was necessary, Velkar replied. The humans had made adjustments to our systems that created cascading effects throughout the entire theater of operations. Every small change they implemented had been designed to influence enemy operations indirectly. The auditorium fell silent as students tried to understand what this meant. The concept of winning battles without fighting was foreign to most galactic military traditions. The Hegemony Alliance began making tactical errors, Velkar continued. Their supply convoys traveled through areas where coalition forces happened to be positioned. Their communication networks failed at critical moments during important operations. Their equipment broke down just when they needed it most. But how could adjusting our systems affect their operations? Asked Park Minho. Because all military systems are interconnected, replied Selenite Fleet Commander Nexara as she stepped forward to join the presentation. Supply routes, communication frequencies, maintenance schedules, patrol patterns, everything influences everything else in ways that most military leaders never consider. The display showed complex diagrams illustrating how changes to one system could affect dozens of others through indirect connections and cascading consequences. The networks of influence were far more complicated than traditional military training covered. The humans understood these connections better than anyone, Nexara explained. They could predict how adjusting coalition logistics would force the hegemony to modify their own operations, which would create vulnerabilities that could be exploited through further adjustments. Within 6 months, exactly as Admiral Lee had promised, the hegemony alliance collapsed completely, Velkar announced. Not from military defeat, but from systematic operational failure. Their supply networks broke down, their alliance members began fighting each other, and their military forces surrendered without Ma. The emergency alert began broadcasting throughout the academy at 0347 hours, waking every cadet and instructor from sleep with its piercing tone. Red warning lights flashed in the corridors while automated announcements repeated the same message in multiple galactic languages. The Nexus Defense Fleet was under attack by hostile forces, and all Academy personnel were ordered to emergency stations. Lihana dressed quickly in her standard uniform and joined the stream of cadets moving through the station corridors toward designated assembly points. Around her, alien students talked nervously about the situation while checking their personal communication devices for updates. The Academy had never experienced a real military emergency during its decades of operation. In the main command center, Commandant Thoxlar coordinated with senior instructors while receiving status reports from the battle zone. The massive displays showed tactical positions of defense fleet vessels, engaged with enemy forces throughout the star system. Red symbols indicated ships that had already been destroyed or disabled. Rogue hegemony remnants, announced Combat Master Thexlar as he reviewed intelligence data. Survivors from the old alliance who have been hiding in the outer systems for 20 years. They have returned with new technology and a desire for revenge. The attacking forces had somehow disabled the defense fleet's central communication networks, preventing coordinated responses to the assault. Individual ship commanders were fighting independently without tactical coordination or strategic oversight. Against organized enemy formations, the scattered defense ships were being systematically destroyed. All senior staff will deploy immediately to assist fleet operations, Commandant Thoxlar ordered. Instructors will transfer to command positions on available vessels. Cadets will maintain academy security and support civilian evacuation procedures. Within 30 minutes, most of the academy's experienced officers had departed to join the desperate battle. The remaining staff consisted of junior instructors and training personnel who had no authority to make strategic decisions. Academy. Cadets found themselves with minimal supervision during the greatest crisis in the station's history. Cadet Commander Zixathara took charge of the remaining students with her usual confident leadership style. She organized security patrols, assigned cadets to monitor communication systems, and coordinated with civilian authorities about evacuation preparations. Her natural command presence helped maintain order among the mixed species students. Intelligence. Team will monitor fleet communications and provide status updates, she announced to the assembled cadets. Security teams will maintain station defenses. Support teams will assist with civilian evacuation if necessary. Park Minho established himself at the intelligence monitoring station and began tracking radio transmissions from the battle zone. Kim Jisoo coordinated internal communications between different cadet teams. Yoon Taik supervised technical systems to ensure the Academy's computers and networks remained functional. Lee Hana approached Zixthara quietly, while the Krillian cadet was reviewing tactical displays. "I could help with coordination if you need additional support," she offered in her soft voice. Zixthara looked down at the smaller human cadet with something that might have been respect mixed with wariness. After Captain Velkar's lecture 3 days earlier, every alien student in the academy viewed Hana differently than before. "What kind of coordination?" Zixthara asked carefully. "Communication protocols and resource allocation," Hana replied. "Similar to logistics support but expanded to include fleet operations." The Krillian commander considered this offer, while reports continued arriving about deteriorating conditions in the battle zone. Defense fleet casualties were mounting rapidly, and enemy forces were advancing toward critical system installations. Very well, Zixthara decided. You may assist with coordination activities. Hana moved to a secondary workstation and began accessing Academy communication systems. She studied the chaotic radio traffic from the battle zone while making careful notes about transmission patterns, response times, and coordination failures. The defense fleet's problems were immediately obvious to anyone who understood how military communication networks were supposed to function. The enemy is using signal jamming to prevent fleet coordination, she announced after 20 minutes of analysis. However, they are only targeting primary communication frequencies. Secondary and maintenance channels remain functional. Can we use those channels to restore fleet coordination? Asked Park Minho from his intelligence station. Not directly, Hana replied while continuing to work at her computer interface. But we can use them to establish indirect communication networks that bypass the jamming. She began implementing modifications to the Academy's communication systems, creating relay networks that could connect with defense fleet vessels through unconventional signal paths. The changes were subtle and required detailed understanding of how different communication protocols could be linked together. Within an hour, defense fleet commanders began receiving coordinated tactical information despite the enemy jamming efforts. Ship captains who had been fighting independently suddenly found themselves connected to strategic oversight networks that could coordinate their operations effectively. This is incredible, reported Kim Jisoo from her communication post. Fleet coordination is being restored across the entire system. But Hana was not finished with communication improvements. She had noticed patterns in the enemy jamming signals that suggested vulnerabilities in their own coordination systems. While restoring defense fleet communications, she also began implementing subtle interference with enemy signal networks. Enemy formations are starting to show coordination problems, Park Minho announced from his intelligence monitoring position. Their attack patterns are becoming less organized. The tide of battle began shifting as defense fleet vessels regained the ability to coordinate their operations while enemy forces experienced increasing communication difficulties. Ships that had been retreating in confusion suddenly found themselves able to form effective defensive formations. Hana continued working at her station, making increasingly complex modifications to communication protocols and signal routing systems. She was no longer just restoring defense fleet coordination. She was actively disrupting enemy command networks through the same indirect methods her father had used during the original hegemony wars. Enemy supply ships are deviating from their planned routes, reported Yoon Taik from his technical station. They appear to be receiving contradictory navigation instructions. Their attack formations are breaking up, added Park Minho. Individual enemy vessels are operating without central coordination. The rogue hegemony forces that had arrived with careful strategic planning and coordinated attack sequences found themselves caught in a cascade of communication failures and tactical confusion. Supply lines became unreliable, command orders were delayed or misdirected, and unit commanders began making independent decisions that conflicted with overall strategy. "How are you doing this?" asked Zixthara while watching tactical displays that showed enemy forces retreating in disorder. "I am making small adjustments to signal routing and protocol translation," Hana replied without looking up from her work. "The enemy communication systems are adapting to each change, but their adaptation process creates new vulnerabilities that can be exploited through additional adjustments. It was the same approach that had destroyed the Academy's simulation, AI during the midterm examination, but applied to real military networks on a much larger scale. The enemy's own communication systems were being turned against them by someone who understood exactly how artificial intelligence and automated systems processed information. By the fourth hour of the crisis, rogue hegemony forces were experiencing complete operational breakdown. Their coordinated attack had dissolved into isolated actions by individual ships and small groups that could no longer communicate effectively with each other or receive strategic guidance from Central Command. Defense. Fleet vessels that had been on the verge of destruction found themselves facing confused and disorganized enemies. The systematic destruction of defense positions was replaced by successful counterattacks against enemy forces that could no longer coordinate their defensive responses. "Enemy forces are withdrawing," announced Park Min-ho with amazement in his voice. "All hostile contacts are retreating toward the system boundary. Some enemy vessels are surrendering," added Kim Jisoo from her communication station. "They are requesting terms for formal surrender." The battle was over. Rogue hegemony, forces that had arrived with overwhelming advantages and careful strategic planning, were fleeing the system in complete defeat. Their return to seek revenge had ended in disaster more complete than their original defeat, 20 years earlier. Commandant Thoxelar returned to the Academy 6 hours after the emergency began, expecting to find chaos and possible evacuation, procedures in progress. Instead, he found calm organization and normal operations under cadet supervision. The greatest external threat to the Academy in its history had been resolved by students working together effectively. "Report," he ordered.